Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Wednesday afternoon. I will make some announcements of upcoming programs in the next 2 weeks. So tomorrow is Shakespeare in the Park. It should be in the back garden of the library, unless there's thunderstorms, which will be inside because it's too dangerous to be outside when there's thunderstorms. You do not need rain passes. Just show yourself over here. We will find out throughout the day. It really depends on the weather because the weather is constantly changing, so we can't predict what will happen tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. We will send out, it will be posted on our social medias. You could call the library. If you don't have social media, it will be posted on our website. We will send out the newsletter. So you have multiple ways of finding out that information. Then on Friday, we have Friday afternoon at the movies. The movie that is playing is The Housemaid. Yeah, it's a long movie. It's in English with English subtitles. It'll be here in the auditorium. Then on Monday, we have Lundi Cinéphile, which is a French movie at 6 p.m. It will be in the auditorium. It's in French with French subtitles. It's an hour and a half. It's called L'Histoire de Soliman. On Tuesday, we will have Gale, and the movie is called The Coral. That is also a longish movie. It's 113 minutes. It's in English with English subtitles. Then on Wednesday, oh, I'm running out of breath here. On Wednesday, we have a health talk with Dr. Christopher Labos. It will be here. You do not need anything. You just show yourself here. And that will only be in person. It will not be on Zoom. So only in person for that one. Then on Sunday, August 16th, we will have the Lakeshore Concert Band. It will be in the Ashkelon Gardens if it's sunny. If it's raining, it will be in here. The rain passes will be available on Thursday, August 13th as of 10 a.m. And I think that's it for now. I think I gave you guys enough information. It's a ton.
It's a lot of activities for Cote-Saint-Luc. I think you should be congratulated for sponsoring so many activities. It's really a great thing. So yeah, this is my last class for this session. I thought there was one next week, but Angela tells me there isn't one. It was on my calendar, Angela. You know that? Yeah. Yeah, I'll be back beginning of September. That's right. And Tuesdays, right? Yeah, I know because Tuesdays they use this room for something else, for movies and stuff. But she says a longish movie, an hour and 13 minutes. That's not long for a movie. Anything over 2 hours is long for a movie. Did anybody see The Odyssey? Anyone have any of you seen this movie yet? It's like the movie I guess the biggest hit going on this summer. I did see it. And normally I don't go to movies, but this is one that you need to go see on a big screen in an IMAX theater. And it's a retelling of the story of Odysseus from Homer, the Greek poet, the Greek writer. And so many people have written translations and have done work about this story. And the critics of the movie, there were many types of critics of the movie. The usual critics, I would say, is, well, they didn't tell the real story. Well, the guy is living in 2026, making a movie for a world audience, especially for an American audience. You can't expect him to do word for word what Homer wrote about in his story. They have to leave out the super violent parts. They have to leave out the we'll call them scandalous parts. They tried to make Odysseus as a kind of a hero. When Homer was writing about this person, he didn't really write about him as a hero. He wrote about him as a kind of a character with lots of flaws, lots of weaknesses, lots of strengths. So it's a much more complicated story than, and this is a brushed off Hollywood version, but still it's a fantastic Hollywood version. And it's worth seeing. It's a good story and it's worth seeing. Especially, I know I'm pretty positive that in high school, if all of you went to high school, at one point or another, you might have read the um, the Iliad or the Odyssey, both by Homer, classical Greek stories. You could almost say that these stories were the first well-known pieces of literature in the Western world. And so that's why they're so important. So anyway, it is worth seeing, and it's on a big screen. There's lots of action, lots of battles and all kinds of stuff like that. People who were writing, there were some critics, they wrote, the Greeks, their battle costumes were not black, they were brown. So, I mean, this is the kind of criticism that people give because they're critics. They have to criticize something. Anyway, so let's leave that alone. But, it is even if you don't see movies very often, this is a kind of a good one to see. Now, I wanted to speak a little bit about the election results yesterday in the United States primaries. And why I'm speaking about it, why I'm mentioning it is, you know, it's important even to us here because, I'm a strong believer in the theory that everything that happens somewhere else eventually affects us. One way or another, that's what it happens. There's many steps along the way. If you think of, you think of a row of dominoes and you push down the first one and we're down there at the end, all those dominoes fall down, 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 and then eventually it comes to us. And certainly in America, because we're such close neighbors, anything important, any big important change in the country is bound to affect us one way or another. So what happened what happened last night? So we are in a whole series of what's called primaries. And a primary is where the contestants for the future election are chosen by members of each party. So primary is a kind of an election, but only members of one party get to vote for their candidate, who will then be presented against the opposition candidate in the November elections. So November the 6th, there will be elections in the United States. The entire House of Representatives is up for election, 436 members, and 435, I think. And 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. And plus many, many, many state offices in the individual states, governors and senators and all kinds of, politicians and judges. And when America gets to vote, they get to vote, as they used to say, for the dog catcher. So they really do have a lot of choices to make. Now, over the past few years, we've seen trends in the Western world, political trends. And what are those trends? The trends seem to be that the people who are in the middle, meaning moderate center people, people who are neither too left-wing or too right-wing, whatever you want to take that to mean, that the center, which used to occupy maybe 75% of all of the people in the Western world, that this center is breaking down, that people are moving to extremes. People on the right are moving to the right, and people in the left are moving to the further left. So a good example of that would be in Great Britain. We just take a look at Great Britain for a second. They used to have two parties, Labour Party, which we'll call it center left, and the Conservative Party, we'll call that center right. Or if we look in Canada, we could talk about the Liberal Party, which I would call it just plain center, and the Conservative Party, which would be about sort of center right. So that was the way, over 75%, certainly, and more than that, those two parties got usually 75 to 80% of all the votes cast in Great Britain and in Canada as well, you could say. But that's all changed. What's changed is that I would have to say that Donald Trump has had such a huge effect on world politics that he's inspired people on the right to move to the right. And he's encouraged opposition to him, who are opponents to him, to move to the left. And so the center is getting kind of emptied out. So in Great Britain, we'll go back to Great Britain, we have the Conservative Party, but there's a party to the right of the Conservative Party called these days the Reform Party. And you remember we had a Reform Party in Canada also. You remember Preston Manning? He was the head of that party. So that party set itself to the right of the Conservatives. And in Great Britain, you have a party called the Reform Party, which is also to the right of the Conservatives. And if you look at the polls today, in Great Britain, the Reform Party has more support than the Conservative Party. Now let's look at the left. Okay? So in Great Britain, the Labour Party was the party of the left. Sometimes they were a little more left than other times, but they all held a kind of a left sort of social democratic philosophy. The state has to be involved in the levers of the economy. The state has to make sure that the poorest of the people have some support. The state had to support public housing. The state had to support public health care. These are policies that the Labour Party in Great Britain always stuck to. The Labour Party in the last British election won an enormous majority, but they didn't have enormous support. And the reason for that is because there were so many different political parties running that the Labour managed to come ahead because all the rest of the votes were quite split. And so we have a new phenomenon in Great Britain, a party to the left of Labour, which is called today the Green Party. They have not much, I would say, to do with, usually Green parties stand for the environment, environmental protection, getting away from carbon production, new kinds of generation of electricity, that type of policy, environmental policies, protecting nature, protecting animals, that thing. But the Green Party in Great Britain, it seems to be of all nutty things, that Israel seems to be their main occupation. And being against Israel is their main draw for their candidates. And they ran very, very strongly in areas of Great Britain which have significant Muslim populations. So you've got then those four parties. And in Great Britain, you've got one called the Liberal Democrats, which is a kind of a center party, but appealing much more to the wealthiest people in Great Britain, I will say. That's them. So you really have five parties where you used to have two. Now, in the United States, because of the way the US is made, you can't have a lot of different parties because it's a winner-take-all system. And third parties in the United States have almost never succeeded. I can give you some examples, but these examples go way back to the 1910s and 20s. But really, third parties in the US just can't make it. Why? The cost of running an election, the cost of advertising, the organization that you need, the whole structure that you need makes it very hard for a third party to get started from nothing. And then where would that third party be? Whose votes would they take? You see? If you say that the Democratic Party is on the left and the Republican Party is on the right, a third party would be in the middle, but there's lots of people in the middle who are both Republicans and Democrats. There is talk now. I don't know if you've heard that there is talk of establishing a third party in the US. The party would be sponsored by a former senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin. And he's talking about it. But he's been talking about that for 5 years already. So it doesn't look, it's just not practical. Let's put it like that. So let's come back then to the yesterday's results. And yesterday's results, well, let's start with the Republican Party. The Republican Party, I would say, has two different wings in it, or two different flavors in it. One flavor is really a far right, nationalistic, xenophobic, militant wing, which is led by Donald Trump and all of his followers who he managed to get appointed and elected in the last election and the election from 2016. So this wing of the Republican Party, I would say, is the most right-wing presentation of the Republican Party for maybe ever. Because if you think back of George Bush and George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, they never had the idea that the police would round up innocent people on the streets, take them to jail, and put them on a plane to God knows where. They never had that idea. They never had the idea to cancel people's health insurance. They never had the idea to eliminate books from libraries. They never had the idea to get rid of the right for a woman to have an abortion. So all of these acts, this is just we'll call it a thumbnail summary of all the stuff they've done. These clearly plant one element of the Republican Party, the big element right now, in the far right wing of that party. There is another part of the Republican Party, but they've been so thoroughly defeated and humiliated by Trump that any time a contestant shows up to run in the primaries for the Republican Party, Trump makes sure that there's another candidate who's even more radical, and that person almost always will win the primary, meaning he'll win the votes of the members of the Republican Party. It's important to point out one thing about primaries, though. Primaries only appeal to members of each party. Today in the United States, if you ask people, what's that music? If you ask people, are you a Democrat? Are you an independent? Or are you a Republican? What do you think is the biggest answer? It's independent by quite a lot. So people in the US today don't identify with each of the parties because of that they don't like either of them. They might feel that neither of them is representing what they want. They might not like the leadership of either of them. But no matter what it is, most people in the US identify as independents. Now let's look at the Democratic Party. Also has two elements. You have an element, we'll call it, of the center and an element of the left. And over the past couple of years, the element of the left has gone stronger and stronger and stronger. And this element of the left is some of it is really far left. So in other words, if you look at what they say, they want what you might call socialism. The government owns the means of production, the government owns housing, the government owns the factories. There is a very high income tax on rich people. There is a complete loosening of the kicking out of all illegal migrants in the United States. Just to remind you all that according to the American statistics, there's 11 million people living in the US illegally. Illegally means that they came without papers, without permission. Now, they might have been kids brought by their parents, but they are still illegal. And according to the laws of the U.S. government today, if you came illegally to the United States, you are a felon. It means you've automatically broken the law. So if you're automatically broken the law, that means that the United States government has the right to kick you out. And that's what they are doing. It's quieter now, but they're trying to arrest and deport. Their figures are ranging around 5,000 a week of people that they're deporting. So that's a large number. So the left wing of the Democratic Party looks at this and says, you know, when Trump said he would deport all the criminals, who could be against that? But none of these people are criminals except for the fact that they came illegally to the United States. And in many, many cases, these people were minors. They were brought by their parents. So, and crossing the border without papers is an offense. But, you know, so is running through a red light. It's an offense. Doesn't mean that you're a criminal for doing something like that. So the left wing of the Democratic Party, through its wins in the primary, have gotten stronger and stronger. And last night was a great example. So you probably heard about this. This is a really important election that took place last night. It was in the state of Michigan, and they were choosing who should be the Democratic nominee for the Senate seat coming up in November. Now, the Senate seat up until now was held by a Democrat, but that Democrat is retiring, and so the seat is open. Whenever you have an open seat, it's always a chance for the opposition to win, because being an incumbent is always like a kind of a finger on the scale. You already you write re-elect so-and-so on your signs. So it's a kind of like a help to already be in office. So because this was an open seat, everyone was really pushing to try to win it. Because Michigan is one of the 7, what they call purple states, purple meaning neither red Republican nor blue Democrat. So if you mix if you mix the two colors together, red and blue, you get purple. So purple means that the state is not strongly identified with one party or another. It's kind of a real close race. So North Carolina is a purple state, for example. Arizona is a purple state. Wisconsin is a purple state. Pennsylvania is a purple state, and so is Michigan and Nevada. Those are the list of the states that were called purple up until now. Donald Trump in the last election won all of them, 7 out of 7. And Joe Biden won 6 out of 7 in the previous election when he got elected. So these states, these 7 states, really tell the story of who's going to be elected, who's going to be the president the next time around. So that's why Michigan is so important. It's really evenly divided. So the way things worked out for the Democrats is you had this Egyptian descended doctor who's not a medical doctor, but PhD, Abdul Sayed. And he was running for the nomination. And he was running as a democratic socialist, meaning this new left-wing section of the Democratic Party, backed by Bernie Sanders, backed by Cortez in New York City, backed by Mamdani, the mayor of New York. This whole new left wing of the Democratic Party has become very strong, and this was a test to see if he would win. Now, he had originally faced 2 opponents, 2 moderate opponents. One of them pulled out because she said, look, he's going to win for sure. If we have 2 moderates and 1 radical, then the moderate vote will be split and the radical will win. So she pulled out, leaving 1 and 1. And the polls were showing, interestingly enough, last week, the polls were showing that he, Mr. Sayed, was ahead by at least 10 points, that he was really way ahead. The actual results of last night were that he won by 1 point something percent. It was really close. It was 30,000 votes out of a 1.4 million. So that's, you got to say that that's pretty close. It was like, 49.8% to 48.5%, something like that. So what that means is he will be the candidate for senator in the upcoming elections in November against the Republican candidate. Now think of how much the Republicans wanted him to win, because it's so easy to run against a guy who says, I'm a socialist, who in particular, this guy is 100% anti-Israel, 100%, not 99%, 100%. So he says Israel does not have the right to exist as a Jewish state. Now, the United Nations voted for Israel to exist as a Jewish state in 1947. That's what the world wanted. That is, of course, the definition of Israel, which is the only Jewish state in the world. It has a minority of Arabs who are citizens, maybe 21%, but still the vast majority of people in that state are Jewish and want that state to be seen as a Jewish state. Except Mr. Abdel Said doesn't want that. What he wants is that Palestine should be the state. The Jews could live in Palestine, but they wouldn't be a Jewish state. It would be a state mixed with Arabs and Jews mixed in it together. So the 4 million people who are living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, maybe 5 million, those would be added to the 2 million Arabs already living in Israel. So you got 7 million Arabs in Israel. And you've got somewhere around 8 million Jews living in Israel. So it would be close to a 50-50 sort of split in the population. And that's what he wants. So obviously, think of this, okay? That in the Democratic Party, for Democrats, the biggest group, if you want to take group, who voted for the Democrats in the last election against Trump were Black people. Black people voted in the very high 80s% for the Democratic Party. The next identifiable group were Jews. Jews voted 70% for the Democratic Party. Now think of this, in Michigan, you've got this candidate who says Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state. What are the Jewish people in Michigan supposed to do? Now, the statistics say that 70% of American Jews identify with Israel in some way or other. In other words, they believe that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, even though they may have zero interest in ever going there, visiting there, or doing anything there. So that's a fairly large majority. But also 30% have no connection to Israel. Say, I'm Jewish, but to me, Israel doesn't mean anything. In the last mayor election in New York City, Mayor Mamdani, the one who's a democratic socialist, whose ideas are very similar to Mr. El Sayed, he got 1/3 of the Jewish vote, and he still won the election. So in Michigan, the Jews are a much smaller percentage of the population, very, very small, I would have to say. So their votes, even though there will be some Jews who definitely will not vote, period, for governor in the upcoming election, or maybe a few will vote, more than a few will vote for the Republican candidate. My guess is the majority of them will just not vote, period. So that is going to be a net loss for Mr. El Sayed. However, his camp believes that he's such a good candidate. He's so inspiring. He's such a well-spoken person. He's got such charisma and personality that he will draw in voters who normally wouldn't vote at all to vote for him. On the other hand, the Republicans are going to say Mr. El Sayed is a communist waiting to burn down America. He's they'll say he wants to get rid of all the police. He'll say he's going to open up the jails and let people out. They'll say, every imaginable radical thing against him, hoping that people will be convinced to vote for the Republican candidate. So this is going to be a real interesting test. If Mr. El Sayed wins the election, what that means is it's a clear message that the Democratic Party can afford to be more radical and more left-wing and still win elections. If he loses by a big majority, it will tell the Democratic Party, don't pick these crazy radical lunatics who say, we want to nationalize everything, because in the end, the American people don't want that. And it's so interesting because when you look at the election results in Michigan, who voted for each of the two Democratic candidates? Black people and rural people definitely voted for the opposition. Her name was Haley Stevens. The intellectuals, the urban white intellectuals, upper classes, they're the ones who support the so-called democratic socialists. Even though the socialists are saying we have to tax the rich, it's the rich that vote for them. It's a very kind of a paradoxical situation. And it's not the only place that happens, by the way. So that is really the main takeaway of yesterday's elections. There were a couple of other, there was one loss and two wins for the radical element of the Democratic Party. So you can be sure, come November, forget November, come September, next month, if you watch American TV, you're going to be bombarded with ads. Don't let the communists take over America. So it's going to be really an interesting campaign. Let's put it like that. So far, what seems to be the case is that people are so anti-Trump that they're willing to vote for anybody who is also anti-Trump. Trump's popularity has gone down to 34% of Americans think he's doing a good job. That's as low as one has ever seen in a preferential vote for president. So he's really, really in bad shape. Now, this may translate to losses in the November elections. The question is, how big will those losses be? So that's a kind of just a summary of what happened yesterday. It was really the biggest event of the whole season. But everyone was looking forward to this event to see what would happen. And the opponent to Mr. Said, Ms. Stevens, she did a lot better than the polls were saying, a lot better. So people were really kind of scared that if he wins, that the Democrats could actually lose the seat that they already had. And it's really important because if the Democrats could win, if they have what they have now, and they win 3 more seats, they could take over control of the Senate. It's already assumed that they will take over control of the House of Representatives. So if they control both houses, President Trump, with 2 years left on his mandate, will pretty well be frozen as far as what he's able to do. So, that's really an important move in a way. The Michigan move kind of takes one seat that was a given for the Democrats and puts it in the doubtful position. So the Democrats have to win that one seat plus 3 more in order to control the Senate. They have chances. They do have. It was assumed at the beginning they'd have no chances, but Trump is so unpopular that in Maine, in Iowa, and in Alaska, those are all held by Republicans. The Democrats might just win those 3 seats, and outside chances in other places as well, like Ohio. Okay, so I'm going to just stop right over there. Any comments, questions about this election? They hold primaries all the time. They had them last night also. No, the contestant in Michigan, he was acclaimed, so he had no opposition. So they know who he's going to be. Yeah. Often it happens that way. Most often, there isn't a contest. Most often, especially if there's an incumbent, there's usually no contest at all. Um, so, for example, you heard Lindsey Graham died, the senator from South Carolina. The governor, in those cases, appoints a replacement. So he appointed his wife as a replacement, but she is going to face a primary. I think might be next week against another person who says, I want to be the senator, the Republican senator from South Carolina. So she's going to run against someone else. Probably she'll win, probably. Any other questions, comments? So what I wanted to speak about, let's check my watch. Okay. So I wanted to, and I have spoken about this again, but it's so worthwhile coming back. It's about the subject that we all know about, the climate, the changing climate, the climate change, changing climate, because statistics were just published last week showing that the Earth is hotter than it's ever been before, that record high temperatures are being broken all over the place. Fires, of course, result from high temperatures and dry temperatures. You saw in Europe what's happening. London hit almost 40 degrees. London, 40 degrees in summer. Like, usually in summer, they barely get over 20. In Paris, it was 40 degrees. That's not normal for Paris. Southern Spain, yes, but not Paris. The high temperature records were set in Hungary. Records were set in Germany, and Berlin was also somewhere like 42 degrees in Berlin, which is not a warm city. So this heat wave is just a symptom of all of the heat waves that are happening around the world. And so far, we've been actually having a reasonably nice summer here in the eastern part of North America. But in the western part of North America, of course, there have been some horrible, some record high temperatures being hit. Forest fires in Washington State, in Oregon State, in British Columbia. There was a forest fire in Northern Ontario. This is a sign of a new times. This isn't the same. This isn't the normal situation. This shows that everything that we knew of is different. So one study that I read this past week is really interesting. They have looked at the Earth from outer space, from satellites that are circling the Earth. They've been taking pictures now for 25 years. And if you compare a picture of the Earth 25 years ago to a picture of the Earth now, it's clearly different. What's different is 25 years ago, the Earth was much brighter. From outer space, it was much shinier. And now it's much duller. So what explains that? What explains it is that the amount of sunshine that's reflected back into outer space from the Earth is less. Okay, what that means is the sun's power doesn't change very much as far as we're concerned. It changes over billions of years for sure. One day the sun will just go out like a candle. But, like after your grandchildren's time. So let's not worry about that. But when the sun shines down on the Earth, anything white that it hits reflects the sun back up into outer space. So that means especially the ice covering the Antarctic, the ice covering the Arctic. It means the particles that are in the atmosphere, like little tiny pieces of stuff that the sun hits and then gets bounced back into outer space. So when it gets bounced back, it looks really bright. But the fact that the Earth is duller from outer space means that much more of that sun heat is staying inside the atmosphere. And that's what's making the Earth warmer. The simple explanation is that carbon dioxide, which is a colorless, odorless gas, but it's a gas, it goes up when it is emitted from the earth, from people or from animals or from the earth itself. This carbon dioxide rises in the atmosphere and then stops. It doesn't make it, it can't get past the last layer of the atmosphere. So it sits there like a blanket. That means that when the sun shines through it, because it's colorless and it's colorless. So when the sun shines through it, right? The sun hits the earth, the heat hits the earth, and then there's no reflection back up into outer space because it's blocked off by this blanket of carbon dioxide. And we know for sure, that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is double, the concentration is double what it used to be. And I always say, well, how do we know how much carbon dioxide there was 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago? It's so easy to tell. You know how? You look at the ice, the bubbles in ice, you drill down in the ice sheet in Antarctica. So the ice, of course, there's air in the ice, right? You know, we know that. If you make an ice cube, there's air inside that ice cube. All you have to do is drill down the right amount of time, and you can measure what carbon dioxide concentration there was in the atmosphere 250,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago. That's how old that ice is. And 50 years ago. So we know now that in parts per million, that doesn't seem like a lot. There's over 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide when it used to be 200 parts per million. You say, what the heck's the difference? It's still parts per million. But it is a difference. It's a big difference. Where does that carbon dioxide come from? Well, we all know that too. It comes from burning fossil fuels, burning wood, burning coal, burning oil, burning gas, burning anything that has carbon in it. So carbon is like the building block of life. Our bodies have carbon in it, lots of it. So when that carbon is burnt, it combines with oxygen to make carbon dioxide. And that's a very stable molecule. It doesn't break up. It doesn't disappear. Carbon dioxide is what we breathe out every bit. We take in oxygen into our lungs. The oxygen gets distributed into our bloodstream. And then what we breathe out is carbon dioxide. So not only do we breathe out carbon dioxide, every single animal, every chicken, every pig, every horse, every cow, every goat also breathes out carbon dioxide. They breathe it out from both ends, by the way, from the front end and the back end. So cars burn up, emit carbon dioxide. Steel plants emit carbon dioxide. Cement plants are a huge emitter of carbon dioxide. It all goes up in the atmosphere, and it stays there. It's a stable element. You've heard of carbon monoxide, right? That's different. That's carbon also with an oxygen molecule, but one instead of two. That's very unstable. So if you burn carbon in a low atmosphere situation, right, you will get carbon monoxide, which is a poisonous gas, right? So if you leave your car on in the garage and there's no air around there, the car exhaust is burning carbon dioxide and monoxide together, you will die because the carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas. But it doesn't last long. It changes into carbon dioxide. So that's what that is. The the heat that they've had in Europe, according to this here, has caused 1,300 excess deaths. So 1,300 people died in the heat wave of Europe that normally would not have died. because they have records of everyday averages of how many people die a day in France, how many people die a day in Italy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they say this time there were 1,300 excess deaths because of the heat wave. People who were already weak, who were already sick, in nursing homes, without air conditioning, they just can't cope. The last big heat wave that they had in France, in Paris, they had 15,000 excess deaths in 2 weeks. They because of the heat wave. Remember that in Europe, it's not normal to have air conditioning pretty well anywhere, even in Spain, which is the hot country, only 40% have air conditioning. And of course, in England, nobody had it. In France, a quarter of the people have it. So it's not something that's considered to be normal the way it is in the US. And here in Montreal, I certainly grew up in a house without air conditioning. The house that I lived in up until 5 years ago had no air conditioning. I mean, it wasn't something that people took for granted. It wasn't like a necessity. You'd have a couple of hot weeks, you open a window, you put on a fan, and that's it. Otherwise, your concern was with heating, not with air conditioning. The fires in Spain and France had 330,000 people evacuated. The temperatures in France this summer were 12 degrees centigrade hotter than normal, and the UK 10 to 12 degrees. Even in Sweden, 7 to 10 degrees hotter than normal. So our average temperature all around the world is coming close to 1.5 degrees centigrade hotter than normal. And there is a kind of a point of no return. So what do I mean by a point of no return? Like, why doesn't just get, it could be hot for maybe 20 years, maybe it'll go back to being cool after that. The point of no return comes because the heat that we have is melting all of the glaciers in Europe. It's melting the ice sheets in Africa, the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle. So that leaves less white color for the sun to hit and bounce back. On the other hand, the dark color of the ocean attracts the sun. The sun heats up the ocean. This extra 1.5 degrees that I'm talking about, you know where 90% of it is? It's in the ocean. It's not on our land. Our oceans have just got that much warmer over time. I saw a map. I looked at one map. They just had a map published, the map of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. And how many degrees warmer than normal are they? And how many degrees cooler than normal are they? So cooler was blue and normal was orange. Hotter was orange and cooler was blue. There was almost no blue at all. The only blue actually was off the coast of Newfoundland. It's colder than normal, the water there. Everywhere else is way warmer or way warmer than normal. This year is an El Nino year. And we know that El Nino is a regularly occurring warming of the Pacific Ocean on the east side of the ocean, meaning the ocean close to South America. That ocean heats up. And when that ocean heats up, it causes all kinds of things. First of all, what is El Nino? Where did they get that idea from of El Nino? So it all came from fishermen in Peru. The water in Peru is very cold, coming up from Antarctica. There's a current coming up South America, and this cold current is very rich in plankton, and the sardines eat all that plankton, and it was rich fishing. But the fishermen noticed that every few years, the sardines disappeared. And they disappeared around Christmas time. So Christmas time is like El Nino, the child, Christ the child type of thing. And why they disappeared was El Nino brought in a layer of warm water from the central and western Pacific all the way to the coast of South America. And that warm water covered over This is South America, North America, all right, North America here. So El Nino comes like this. This is Peru, Ecuador. El Nino comes across the ocean and it brings warm water that breaks up the current of cold water that comes up this way. It covers it over. So the fish disappear. So they knew, and this happened usually every 7 years. They knew that that's what happened. Then what happens is the opposite happens. Sometimes you get La Nina, which is the opposite, where the warm water from the Pacific Ocean this way goes the other way. It goes to Philippines, Australia, Indonesia. It goes that way. So each of these huge events cause the weather to change all around the world. So the weather in Africa, the weather in India, the weather in North and South America are all affected by this El Nino. We here, because we in North America are completely on the other side, we're all the way over here, we have less effect from El Nino than the places on the West Coast. But the places on the West Coast will get lots of rain, lots of storms. And interestingly enough, in a strong El Nino year, you won't get hurricanes in the Atlantic like normally, because the reason is simple, that the winds coming off of this here push the hurricanes that we get in North America start in Africa, and the wind comes in and it comes into the Gulf of Mexico and turns around and around and around, and then it will push up this way or this way. But if you've got strong pressure moving this way, it's called wind shear. It breaks up any wind coming this way, gets broken by the wind coming that way. And then you won't get the hurricanes developing as normal. You'll have some, but not as much as in a normal year. But El Nino means a huge amount of rain, enormous amount of rain. Now, why so much rain? Because if you think of it, if the atmosphere in the world is warmer, right? Warm air holds way more than cold air. Right? We know that, right? In a hot, humid day, you feel how humid it is. You never say in the middle of winter, oh, it's so humid outside, when it's dry and cold. Because the cold air, if there's any moisture in it, the snow will come down and that'll be the end of it. But warm air can hold a lot more moisture before the rain comes down. So when finally it does come down, it comes down in huge amounts. And, we're talking about flooding amounts. So that's what we've seen also, recently around the world, enormous floods in Asia, in China. Just a few weeks ago, they had one, a whole city was underwater. So this is indirectly caused by global warming. The air has more moisture in it. That moisture has to fall somewhere, and when it falls in one place. It will also cause more severe hurricanes. Not more hurricanes, but more severe hurricanes, because the warm water acts as an engine for the hurricane. It gives the hurricane the energy to spin on that warm water, and then when it hits land, it's of course more dangerous. So this warming of the earth is really something that is not a one-off. Now, what I did read that was kind of interesting, and I might have mentioned it before, a new reason why they say that the earth is getting warmer and why there's less sunlight reflected back is, of all crazy things, the cancellation or the changing of the fuel that ships use. So, the ships are going all across the world, up and down all the time. We don't know this, we don't realize this, but 90% of all cargo that's moved in the world by weight is moved by ship. So there's ships going everywhere. Now, what do ships use for fuel? What's their fuel today? It's diesel, right? That's what they use, diesel fuel. Now, diesel fuel, the cheaper way to make it, had a lot of sulfur in it. The sulfur is inside of the oil. And if you don't take all the steps to refine it, which is expensive, it stays there. Now, when the ship burns the diesel fuel, sulfur particles get emitted and go up in the air. These particles are strong enough to reflect back a lot of sunshine that will come into the atmosphere. And they made new rules to eliminate sulfur from diesel fuel. They say, oh, well, we don't want, pollution, because sulfur is pollution. So we want to eliminate pollution from diesel fuel in ships. So they took the maximum from 5% sulfur down to under 1%. So that means the diesel fuel that's burnt today by ships is much purer, much cleaner. But that means that there's nothing for the sun to hit to bounce back into the atmosphere with. So all that sunshine then comes down and hits the oceans. So that's another explanation of why there is so much carbon dioxide. There's so much carbon dioxide because we burn so much fuel, because the world population is the highest it's ever been, because the world is richer than ever was before. So that means they eat more chicken, more lamb, more beef. All those animals are out there pouring out carbon dioxide. There's another source of it. As the world heats up, there's carbon dioxide trapped in the ground. And that's called permafrost in around Russia and Canada. That carbon dioxide, as the earth warms, gets released from its methane gas. It gets released into the atmosphere. And methane is also a carbon contributor to that. The whole oil and gas industry contributes carbon dioxide when they manufacture it, when they pump it, when they ship it, etc. And another huge component of methane that comes out. So methane is much more powerful than carbon dioxide, 40 times more powerful in the atmosphere, but it doesn't last as long. It breaks down. So rice paddies, rice cultivation, the rotting of the plants in the soil, that produces methane. That methane rises up into the atmosphere. So there's lots of different sources of carbon dioxide. And scientists now say that every scientist knows that the world is getting warmer. The cause of it is the question. People like Donald Trump say, oh, never mind, it's not important. We don't have to even look at the causes. But the scientists all agree today it's human beings that are the cause. It's not a fluke. It's not some kind of natural phenomenon. Now, one thing that lowers the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are volcanoes, interestingly enough. Now, I don't know how many of you remember 1991, there was an eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, of all places, in the Philippines. We had the coldest winter we have had in years because all of the ash that's emitted from the volcano, again, acts as a shield for the sun to come down and hit the earth. The sun hits all that ash, bounces back up into outer space. So that year was a freezing cold year in Montreal, even though it was in the Philippines that the volcano erupted. Oh my God, there's so many different things to speak about. Let me just see here. There's some other points that I had. So we have made a lot of progress in trying to reduce carbon dioxide. We know that. Electric cars are more popular now than they've ever been. Solar panels, wind power to generate electricity. Fantastic ideas. And at first, they were considered to be crackpot ideas, like something that, some kind of a backyard scientist would think about, but had no general application. Today, we see solar panels in a lot of places. We see electric cars being produced and bought all around the world. We're an exception in North America. The rest of the world, electric cars are much more popular than they are here. Um, in Europe, Chinese electric cars are the top seller of electric cars. It's coming to the point we made certain promises. The whole world said we want to have only electric cars by 2030, by 2035, different dates. We've kind of given up on those dates because it looks like too hard to do. But still, people on their own are buying electric cars, even without subsidies from governments, because gasoline has become more expensive, because they're easier to maintain, less breaks down, less moving parts. So electric cars seem to be the way to go. Of course, you need to generate the electricity to put in those cars. So if you're burning fossil fuels like natural gas or coal to produce the electricity to charge the electric cars, you're like changing 4 quarters for $1. So that idea is, it has to be measured much more carefully. We'll put it like that. Let me just see here. So yeah, total electric demand is going up. Now, that's another issue about, we said, what do you use to generate electricity? So the amount of coal, which is like the worst pollutant, is kind of steady, but the percentage of electricity produced by coal is going down. But that doesn't mean that the amount of coal used is going down, because the amount of electricity generated is going higher and higher. And some of it comes from all this AI stuff, these huge electrical facilities that you need for all these computers to run. And a lot of it is because the world is getting richer. So, so many, I was in Africa for a month. Less than half the people had electricity in Africa. But that's changing. Even they're getting wealthier. They're demanding electricity. Electricity has to come from somewhere. And so even though we know on the one hand what's good in the long run, the problem is in the short run, we have responsibilities to deliver a lifestyle, and they clash with the goals for the long run. And that's a dilemma that we are all in. And people say, well, here's the thing. Which country today produces most of the carbon dioxide, more than any other country in the world? I heard an answer. Correct. China is the right answer. So China is producing far more carbon dioxide than any other country, but that's because they have 1 billion people, 0.4. That's because they are modernizing. That's because people are affording to buy cars that never had cars before. And China, if you said to China, well, we want you to reduce everything, China would say, well, wait a minute. We only started doing this around the year 2000. You've been putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in Great Britain since the 1850s, since the Industrial Revolution, when machines started to go. So why are you blaming us for a problem that you made? And you could see how, using this kind of logic, it gets very hard to say, well, this should do this and this should do that. If you have a small country, a very small country, like, I don't know what, any kind of small country, like Luxembourg, let's say, so richest country in the world, but they have almost no people. They say, it's your responsibility to reduce your carbon dioxide. Luxembourg would say, what are you talking about? We're like 1/1,000,000th of the emissions. So like, what's the difference what we do? You see what I mean? Even Canada, we actually emit more carbon dioxide per person than any other country in the world. We're the biggest. We're the champion emitters of carbon dioxide in the whole world. Why? Because we're only 40 million people in this country. We need heat to heat our homes, right? All winter long, we need to heat our homes. We have to, the distances in this country are so great that we have to fly everywhere. So all that airplane exhaust is carbon dioxide. We all have cars because things are so far apart. We don't have the train system that Europe has. And so, yes, per capita, we are a big emitter. But in the whole picture of things, we're like a nobody. So, like, why should Canada feel so guilty about what they're doing? So that kind of logic you could see it gets used all over the world. In the US, they just completely felt that this whole issue is fake, that the United States takes no responsibility for nothing, and let the rest of the world worry about it. We're just going to worry about ourselves. That's, this current administration. So that's why you see with that kind of attitude and philosophy, it explains why this progress that we're making, which is progress, is not enough to stop the long run effects of warming. And you know what's happened? Many United Nations conferences have said, how do we stop global warming? Now they say, we're not going to stop it. How do we adapt to it? That's the new philosophy. How do we adapt to it? How do we change our roads? How do we change our building structures? How do we change our public transportation? How do we change our lives to adapt to this new reality? And some things are pretty simple. Like, for example, if you paint roofs white instead of black, that will reflect the sun that comes and hits them. It's like hitting an iceberg. It'll go back up. It used to be people didn't want to have white roofs on the top because they get dirty or, other reasons. But now people say, no, this is a good idea. We should do something like that. We should plan housing in a better way. We should make it more efficient to cool them. Do windows differently. There's all kinds of structural things for housing. Then there's manufacturing cement and steel. Those are two enormous emitters of carbon dioxide. How can you manufacture those products emitting less? And they are doing it. They're thinking of how to do it, and they're doing it. So the world is making progress in this whole way, but you can imagine, and we should imagine, that we are living in a different world. And we ourselves, who are like 60 plus, we've lived through that change. Because we all know, those of us who've been here our whole lives, like I have been, I know that when I was a kid, the winters are not the same as they are now. Oh my God, we have a guest. We have a guest. That's my granddaughter. Anyway, so I want to, time is up. So I want to say thank you to everyone, and thank you for coming, and we'll see you in September. So, and you can say hi to my granddaughter, Alex. Her name is Alex, right over there. How old is she? She's not old in years, but she's old in knowledge.